Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 76. What can dead babies teach us about cybersecurity hygiene? So imagine this. It's 1847. The world's best doctors are effectively just crazy bastards who have a saw and prescribe cocaine and or whiskey, and oftentimes an infection leads to an amputation or death or any of that news. It's kind of shitty. It's a shitty time to be alive because just there's not a whole lot of medical knowledge. Doctors, medicine in general is basically magic and people getting away with bullshit. People believe some strange things about how medicine works because they don't understand the relationship between the body's healing process versus actual medicine. They don't understand how to do studies on how things actually, affect your body and medication. And it's just kind of, if you get sick, sorry, we're going to dig your grave for you already. But being a woman in 1847, even worse to be a woman in 1847 because childbirth has a huge, significant, gigantic death rate. We're talking anywhere from I believe it got as low as 18% to as high as 90% in some regions. And in this era, in this time period, having children and really all time before, modern day, having children as a woman was a dangerous prospect. It was questionable whether or not you would still come out alive. Today's modern medicine, we're significantly better at that. We know how to properly staunch bleeding. We know how to predict when things are going to go wrong. We know how to do cesarean sections. We have just a lot of different methods to make sure that both mom and baby survive, which is great. It's fantastic, but it hasn't always been like this. And one of the biggest changes occurred in 1847. And specifically in this hospital in Vienna, there were actually two separate hospitals in Vienna, and really a lot of women were dying after childbirth from one. There was nearly 100% mortality rate going to this one particular hospital in Vienna as opposed to this other hospital. And it was a very weird time to be alive. Because if you went to this one hospital, like if you were just closer to it, or that's where your doctor was, or whatever, you would go to this hospital, but you would almost assuredly you would basically be sentenced to die if you were going to have a baby there. And your child might not survive either. There was a pretty high infant mortality rate. Anyway, part of the whole problem that came down to was that there were just different practices being done at both hospitals. And one of the things that was the biggest difference was the fact that at one hospital, there were midwives, and at another hospital, there were doctors. And the midwives would deliver the babies at the one with the midwives, and the doctors would deliver the babies at the other one. And so there was a whole okay, what's the difference between what midwives are doing and what doctors are doing? And, they tried several things. They tried putting midwives in the one hospital and doctors in the other hospital. And really, it didn't seem to make a difference. What the exact cause was, what ended up being the solution wasn't what the nurses or what the midwives were doing. It was actually what the doctors were doing. The doctors were doing something that was causing this high mortality rate. And it was actually, they weren't washing their hands. Like, we think about that now, and it's like, well, shit, doctors wash their hands all the goddamn time. There was a Scrubs episode that was dedicated to just washing fucking hands. Holy shit. You don't think about that. But back then, washing hands was not a thing. It wasn't a thing that was commonly practiced. And it turns out that at this particular Vienna hospital, or actually in all hospitals back then in the dark ages of medicine, doctors would often practice on cadavers before they would then go and do operations because there was no hand washing. They would have all of this bacteria and other, dangerous shit attached to their hands. And then they would go deliver a baby, sticking their hands down in women's crotches and pulling babies out who have no immune system, who have no immune response to anything out in the real world. And this is what was causing this high mortality rate. Now, I tell you this story not to bum you out. In fact, it's good. It's great. We've fixed this. We're washing our hands. If you want to listen to a better version of this story, one that's told by an actual storyteller who has talent and actually writes this shit down rather than me and just spouting whatever the fuck comes to my mind, I definitely push listening to the podcast, The Constant, A History of Getting Things Wrong. And the specific episode is The Reflex. And it's a very interesting story. Mark Chrysler, the guy who does The Constant, is a very good storyteller, does a very good job in deep research, and is an amazing researcher and presents the information in a way that makes sense. Anyway, all that being said, what the fuck does this have to do with cybersecurity hygiene? Well, obviously, washing hands is going to be where I'm going to relate this to. Cybersecurity hygiene, the concept of cybersecurity hygiene is that you are operating in a way that is as clean as possible in everything that you're doing. And what we mean by this when we're talking about cybersecurity hygiene is you can look at two people who operate on the internet. Let's say there are two people who have the same job at the same place, and you have one person who operates in a way where they don't have a password manager. All their passwords are shared, or all of their accounts have the same password. Their MFA, they might have it, but on some wherever it's not forced, they don't have it enabled. They use the same browser to look at porn as they do to do their job. They use the same computer to look at porn as they do to do their job. It happens all the time. They have video games on their computer. In fact, they often do DraftKings or any of the other major gambling daily fantasy things, which requires them to have a tracker on their device. And so they have all this random shit on there. They love coupons. They have these coupon extensions installed. And generally, it's what we would call an uncontrolled system. Their device is not controlled. The data security is questionable. We don't know what is installed on there. We don't know what all these applications do. And it's just questionable. One side note, this guy is also a local admin on his computer, so he can do whatever the hell he wants. So it's bad cybersecurity hygiene. It's going to lead to problems. And we can get into a lot of that here in a little bit. But the other person, let's compare it to this other person, the other person that works at the same job, at the same company. And what they do is they have one browser that they utilize for their job. This browser has almost nothing on top of it. It has only what the IT team has pushed to it. They don't necessarily clear their history, but they definitely don't go to anything that isn't questionable. They operate anything that they need to do that's personal, either happens in a private browser or is done on a separate computer. All of their applications are vanilla. There's nothing different about them. They all have the standard stuff. They all operate normally. And they have just enough of their applications installed to do their job. And there's not a whole lot of extra shit they put on top of that. We have these two individuals, and what we see in IT in general, not just cybersecurity, is that the person who has a local admin on their account, who has all of these additional extensions and uses their computer for everything, we see this person needing a whole lot more support than the person who just is doing their job on their computer and has nothing extra on there. Because this person who is less hygienic about what they're doing, they're mixing their personal environment and their professional environment into one system. We see this person just adding things to their computer and adding, and they might not be outright malicious, but none of it's approved, none of it's been vetted, nothing has been identified for the apps that they're using, except for the stuff they use to do their job, but nothing else in their system has been audited to make sure that it's going to be compliant or even not have any conflicts while it runs. So this person who is just unhygienic is causing a lot more problems. Whereas the other person who's just doing their job on their computer and is just working, doing just what he's supposed to on his computer, doesn't change any of the default settings, because why the fuck would you? This person, and he doesn't have local admin. This person is just working. His computer always works. He rarely needs to get a new workstation. His job is very easy for him to do. He's just kind of streaming along, and nothing really ever kind of bothers him. So when we look at these two people in cybersecurity from a cybersecurity hygiene perspective, the person who has the same password for every account versus the person who has a unique password that is stored in a separate password manager, the one who has the same password for every account, he is going to be more likely to get hacked. In fact, all that needs to happen is one of his accounts needs to get compromised in order for the rest of his accounts to get compromised. Now, an attacker is going to have to be willing to go and find whatever other accounts he has and what other passwords, what of his passwords might work there. But it's trivial. Once that password becomes compromised, everything becomes compromised. It's not just a one and done. Whereas the person who has a unique password for every site, even if his password to the most sensitive aspect of his work gets compromised, well, that's the only password that got compromised. It's the only thing his IT team needs to worry about in resetting his shit. They don't have to worry about all of the other applications. They can be like, okay, we'll look at them, but it's not like we have to do this deep dive. We can just make sure that there's nothing weird happening with his accounts there. And on top of that, the person who has MFA enabled only where it's forced is going to have a weaker multi-factor authentication. They're going to have a higher chance of getting compromised. Whereas the person who has multi-factor authentication enabled on everything that they work on, anything that has it available, they're going to, even if they get compromised, even if their password gets compromised, they're at least not going to get into the system. And there's at least going to be some layer of challenge there that an attacker is not going to be able to bypass easily. And so, you have these two people, and obviously the one who has the better hygiene, as I've discussed, is going to have a less dramatic impact on the organization than the one who doesn't have as good of a hygiene. And so, how do you have good cybersecurity hygiene? What do you do? Like, what are all of the things that you need to do? So first, as I mentioned, have a unique password to every account. Do not share passwords across your accounts. This is important. If you share a password across every account, you will become compromised. If one password gets taken, all of your passwords get taken. That's a bad thing. It's a bad idea. I mean, there's an ease of use and an ease of memory. Yeah, I get it. But would you rather have to type in your password 100 times? Or have to type in your password or have a different password for every single one and not remember it? Or would you rather respond to an emergency and have to pay potentially whatever the ransom is after all of your systems become compromised? Like, responding to an emergency is never fun, and there is some major regret when people have this sort of compromise or takeover occur. So beyond that, passwords are a big thing. Obviously, implementing a password manager is going to be key in those circumstances. Never write down your password, never remember. If you can avoid remembering it, that's even better. Have a password manager that kind of tracks all of that for you. And how is your password manager in a way that makes sense for your organization? Obviously, you're going to have to create and know what that is by yourself. I can't tell you how to do that just because your organization might operate differently than others. But I will say that best practices state that you should have a password manager, and it should be a password manager that allows you to to actively protect all of your accounts and open and actively respond to incidents. And if you are part of an enterprise, it needs to be centrally managed. So that way, if someone loses their access to their account or their account becomes questioned or compromised, you can remediate as quick as possible. Centralized management is kind of key. Having a overarching administrative account, which has a different username and password, that can control aspects of the other password, all of the other users within the password manager, is kind of key. It is important to follow up and use. But beyond password managers, operating on your system, do not operate as local administrator. Don't install just random shit. Only install what you need to do your job. If you need to do personal things, have a separate machine for that. I know it's not necessarily easy for you to have two laptops or two computers. It might not be financially feasible for you, but best practices state that you should separate your business into the types of business that you're operating with. There's a reason why the Department of Defense has separate networks that for different classifications of data. There is a top secret network. There is a secret network. There is a classified network. There's an unclassified protected information network, and they are all accessed differently. In fact, if you have a top secret computer access a secret network, that's a problem. And the whole thing then needs to have a long and laborious process to review. And that's the reason why, is because you've now violated a level of protection. But it's something that the DoD does because it's best practice. You do not mix your businesses. If you have personal business, do it on a personal machine. If there's not a feasible way for you to have two machines, whether it be a limitation of funds or a limitation of resources or a limitation of ability, then absolutely operate within private browser instances to do that business, to do that personal business. Like this is something that's very simple. And the specific reason why is that if you're doing personal business on your work laptop, if you're mixing this business, your personal stuff gets intermingled with your business. I don't know how many of you want to be associated with your workplace, but I certainly don't. I try to avoid associating my name with the company I work for at all costs, even though, I have a link to them on my fucking website, and now I just called attention to it. Fuck. Anyway, you don't want to intermingle your information, or at least you want your information as intermingled, as limited as possible, and in a limited function as possible. Anyway, so that's one. But two, you don't know what you've installed in your personal stuff. You go home, your kid gets on your computer, gets on the family computer, and starts downloading all these extensions, and you don't know if any of them are malicious or whatnot. But if you then log into your personal accounts, like your personal browser session on your work computer, you've now transferred over all of that stuff because of how your account syncs over. So Google and Chrome are very friendly, and they just sync all of the extensions over. So now you have all those extensions that your kid installed on your browser at home. Or, your family friend needed to use your computer once and they did some crazy shit. They used your computer to watch some porn. And yeah, it was midget porn, so you don't have to worry. It was still business related. But, that porn website installed a tracker on your system or whatever. These are all things that can happen, and why you don't mix. You don't operate in that manner. You wash your hands between working on your work computer and working on your private computer. Another aspect of cyber hygiene is also implementing protections for your system. So make sure that you're not installing everything. Don't operate as local administrator. Make sure that you have to sign in as a separate account. Never have the same account that you use to operate in the machine as the administrator of that machine, because you don't know what's going to happen where an application goes rogue and attempts to perform administrative functions and whatnot. You don't know when that's going to cause a problem. So operate as a standard user and not an administrative user. But then also make sure that your administrative account is unique. Make sure it is completely unique from the rest of your system. Don't install random pieces of software. Don't just install everything that's thrown at you. Like the guy who installs the tracking software for their daily fantasy stuff so that they can look like they're coming from their location so they can legally perform fantasy sports stuff. That tracker might not be legit. It might not be something that you want on your government qualified system. And so, operating as administrator will allow you to install these things. Whereas if you're not the local administrator, you won't be able to do these things. But also, you can implement something called PAM, Privileged Access Management. We've talked about it before. Make sure that you have some sort of privileged access management so that it makes it easier for you to then transition from a standard user to an administrative user. So you're not worried about, hey, I do actually need to install this piece of software. Let me just do that. If you have some sort of solution there to make it easier for you, then there's no excuse for somebody to be operating normally as an administrative user. So there's a lot of these things that you can put in place. Make sure you delete your tracking cookies. Make sure you don't allow any cookies or as few cookies as you possibly can as you browse websites. Never click keep me signed in. Never click remember me when you're accessing a website. This is because those links, those things create cookies or tokens on your machine that then can be stolen by an attacker. And if the organization who you've logged into doesn't have proper vetting for token and source computer versus destination computer, Microsoft, then you may end up getting your organization compromised. So in the end, what I guess I'm trying to say is, wash your fucking hands. Make sure you wash your fucking hands, especially if you're going to deliver a baby. But if you're going to deliver a baby, make sure you do it on your work computer and not your fucking personal shit. All right, guys, I hope you have a great day.